Hello and welcome to Transformations Cafe, where we're serving light as bold as love. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Transformations Cafe is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation, or IFGT. We're a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization, and our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and in the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world, both individually and collectively. We invite you to visit us at our website, which is theglobaltransformation.org. And if you would like to learn more about us and become part of our community, there's a join button at the top of every page. And if you'd like to support our work, including programs like this one, there's also a donate button at the top of every page, and that'll take you straight through to PayPal. This program is being recorded and will be published on IFGT's YouTube channel. So we also invite you to find us there and subscribe to our channel. And as I'm sure you've heard, there's a bell icon next to the subscribe button. Hit that and you'll be notified when we post new content. Transformations Cafe, we're a little different in that this is not just an interview program, but it's a conversation. And those of you who have joined us today for the live program, first of all, welcome. And if you would like to participate during the conversation, I'll ask you to please use the chat rather than the raise hand, just so I don't miss you. But would be great if you would either, if you want to come on camera, you can type the letter Q, and that will be my cue to know that you want to interact with the guest directly. Otherwise, you can just type your question in the chat, and I'll get to as many of those as I can. So today's program, I just wanted to mention a little bit. We're trying something a little new, in that we're going to introduce and explore a sampling of what is referred to in some spiritual communities or philosophies as either the wisdom or the ancient wisdom or the perennial wisdom or perennial philosophy. And many of the members of the IFGT community are familiar with this. And so we've collectively decided in the organization to put some of our effort into sharing this information with audiences such as this one and those who will find this program in the future on YouTube. And we're doing this because it is consistent with our mission and vision, which I just read. But as a reminder, part of what I said was that we are intending to use the wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. And we certainly would include this ancient wisdom in the definition of the wisdom referred to. So it's consistent with our work, and it's exciting to reach kind of into this more and share this. So tonight's program is one of the initial ways that IFGT is venturing into exploring the wisdom with the broader audience and sharing it. And to help us do that, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, who is Doug Scott. Doug is a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm going to read his bio so people have a little better idea of what Doug's background is and who he is. But I just want to mention that I first ran into Doug when he was interviewed on another program, Buddha at the Gas Pump, by their host, Rick Archer. And Doug, I think that was one of two interviews I know you've done with Rick now. And I think the first one was about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And as you all will see soon, Doug just has this very warm and easily digested manner of speaking about a lot of spiritual topics, including the wisdom and the perennial philosophy. And so I reached out to him several weeks ago and have just enjoyed interacting with you directly more, and very, very grateful and honored that you accepted our invitation to join us tonight and kind of help us launch this, at least in this format. So Let me read a brief bio, and then Doug is prepared a presentation just to get us started off with, kind of help frame the discussion, provide some definitions, and then during that, audience, you're welcome to ask questions during. We're not going to try to hold those off, so it is a conversation, and as you'll see, Doug and I are pretty easygoing guys, so if we end up straying from the slides, I think that'll be fine. We just kind of want to see where this conversation goes. So with that, Doug Scott is a licensed clinical social worker, and he works as a mental health counselor in his practice in Dallas, Texas. After he graduated from college in 1997, he served as an international volunteer for 2 years in Bluefields, Nicaragua. This intense experience changed his life, and he returned to the U.S. to pursue graduate studies in clinical social work and pastoral ministry at Boston College. The nexus of spirituality and psychology have always intrigued Doug since childhood. He grew up Catholic and was always drawn to the mystical lineage, which came as a surprise since he had not explored other faith systems at that time. He was guided to listen to the Buddhist chant, and pardon me for butchering this, but it's Om Mani Padme Hum. And as the chant unfolded, Doug saw a golden dew overshadow him and activate him in a way that was new. This marked the next chapter in Doug's life. And a few months later, Doug was then led to the Law of One material and immediately saw that it provided the clearest, most undistorted exploration of the perennial philosophy that he'd ever run across. It also cast a wide net to include all of the paranormal things that intrigued him and made it possible for him to put all the different threads in his life together in one seamless garment. Since 2015, Doug has written a blog, which is found at cosmicchrist.net, and we'll put that URL in the show notes on YouTube. And the blog explores the synthesis of the Law of One material with mystical Christianity and psychology. He sees his vocation in this lifetime as a bridge builder between conventional concepts and cosmic metaphysics to help people who seek clarity, normalization, and validation for their own journeys. So I just want to mention before I be quiet and let Doug start with the presentation, this reference to the Law of One. The Law of One is one of many presentations of the wisdom that have been generated really across human history. And IFGT nor Doug are advocating it as a preferred presentation of the wisdom, or certainly not the only, but what we often encounter as we begin to study this information is there may be a form or a few forms that just resonate with us individually. And that's, for Doug, that was the Law of One material. So I invite you all, if you haven't already explored the wisdom or that particular presentation, certainly do explore it if it calls to you. But just want to make the point clear that we are not saying that is the presentation that everyone ought to adhere to, because it's actually just not the case at all. So with that public service announcement, let me take again the great joy and privilege to introduce tonight's guest, Doug Scott.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me, and I am trying to get my screen up. Okay. Hello, everybody. What I hope to do is just give a maybe 15-minute overview of the perennial tradition as I'm currently inspired to see it. Everything is in process, and I am too. And my belief systems are always in process. In other words, I know more today than I knew yesterday, but a year from now or tomorrow, maybe, I will be hopefully enjoying an even wider way to understand this perennial tradition. And what I'm giving you today is kind of where it's like a snapshot of where I understand things as it is now. And this is going to include a lot of different presentations, a lot of different sources. It will also, I hope, bridge some gaps between conventional ways to understand and esoteric ways. I won't be talking directly in this presentation, at least, about the law of one, which is very esoteric, although, we can get into that a little bit later if you like. But what I'm saying here is the perennial tradition is ever ancient and ever new, and that it's a constant living tradition that can be found in the core of things in the past of human wisdom, and it can also be found now. And that's how I understand it. So I'm going to be giving a description. I'm going to give some distinctions about at least two views, two lenses through which people look at the perennial tradition. And there's many different lenses, but I'd like to offer two as just kind of a way to distinguish different lenses. And then I would like to spend a little bit of time of what does it look like to embody the tradition. So I'm going to say right out front that in terms of my own way of understanding things, the perennial tradition or the wisdom tradition, the ancient traditions, for me, they're only good insofar as that I can live them out in the immediacy of my life, in the here and now. And so I'm bringing what I maybe be inspired by reading and watching videos, whatever. I'm bringing that, digesting it, and then incarnating it through my life. And that's the ultimate goal. As far as I can see, now these are going to be real basic, but I can see that there perhaps are four fundamentals of what we mean when we hear about the perennial tradition. And these might be subject to being you disagree with, and that's totally fine too. But let me just offer them that there's first the world of matter, of individuated consciousness, and of expressions of energy. That is the world of things and animals and events and humans and even gods. All of this is the manifestation of a divine ground within which all partial realities have their being, and apart from which they would not exist. And so here, I'd like to just briefly show how it seems to be that the patterns in the micro are matching the patterns in the macro. And as I believe, I'll talk about a little bit later, that if it's true metaphysically, then it needs to be found somewhere in some way in the physical level and in the psychological level. Otherwise, it's not true. A truth will transcend the different modes of being, if you will. So here we have a lung and we have a tree. Trees are the lungs of the earth, and in the lungs are the breathing apparatus of mammals. So there's an example of this particular first principle. Here we have different spirals, all following the same pattern, and they range from solar systems to storms to plants and different even snail shells. And then on the right side of your screen, we have a brain cell, and then we have the universe. You see the different way to see that we filaments, and the nucleus in the brain cell image very much matches the nucleus and filaments and strands and flow of the universe. And then lastly, in similar kind of pattern, we'll see the inner planets as the sun being in the middle, and we have these different planets rotating around, orbiting around. And this very much is interesting and matches at least one model of the atom, where we have a nucleus made up of protons and neutrons, and then these different electrons are orbiting or rotating and in dialogue and relationship with that nucleus. And so we see that the hologram, that is this part, it's at least the first principle of the perennial tradition, the holographic reality is made up of holons or fractals of that. A second fundamental of the perennial tradition: human beings are capable not merely of knowing about the divine ground by inference, they can also realize its existence by a direct intuition superior to reasoning. This immediate knowledge, or gnosis, unites the knower with that which is known. So I want to just highlight really quickly the word gnosis. It might be a new word for some of us, and it might be a familiar word for others. The word gnosis means knowledge gained through experience, or a lived experiential reality. It's the difference between reading about something or reading someone else's firsthand experience and then having that experience for yourself. Okay, so what we're saying here is one of the second fundamental of the perennial tradition is that human beings are not only able to learn about this divine ground, but also through the capacity of our intuition and imagination, imaginal skills, we can enter into and participate in the actual divine life of this divine ground. And that is unitive consciousness. Okay.
And Doug, by divine ground, is it correct to say that is one word that other people might use, source or God or consciousness? Is that
Yeah, I think
divine ground?
Thank you for bringing that up. Divine ground is one word for what other people might say God. Some people might say reality itself. So these are all different words that are trying to capture the highest and greatest wholeness in which all other expressions of wholeness fit into. Yeah. Okay, so the third fundamental of the perennial tradition: humans operate from a significant self, which is like a sense of self, which oscillates between two depths. There's a floating self, which is our false self, and an anchored self, which is the true self. It is possible for a person, if they so desire, to learn how to position their significant self within the depth of the anchored self, and therefore with the divine ground itself. Okay. So this would be a model that I just quickly thought up here, but if you can imagine an ocean, on the bottom of that is a huge boulder. You might even say it's a part of the ocean, that where the part of the ground, where the ground and the boulder meet, there is no separation. The boulder is an expression of the ground. Now imagine a little rope, you could maybe a little chain or something, and it's connected to a floating thing at the very surface of the ocean. And in the middle would be a third node or energetic quanta, or a self. We're calling this the significant self. And the anchored self is the true self. That is who we really are at the deepest levels, below any of the identities or roles that we have. It is the isness of you, the beingness of us. And then the floating self would be the self that's correlated to maybe the egoic self or the image self, something that has feels it's greatly important to be important, or to be the worst thing there ever is. There's usually the poles of I'm the best thing that's ever been and I'm the worst thing, and both of those aren't true. But the floating self, as the false self, is the self that is constantly offended. It is the self that takes offense, and it's the self that we feel like we have to defend. And most of us, I think, live in our floating selves most of the time, unless we're aware of it. And I think the perennial tradition emerges in all of the different world religions and spiritualities to help us in some way identify this triune nature of the self, the anchored self and the floating self, and then the significant self that makes sense and meaning between who I really am and then what my ego wants me to be. Yeah. And so the more that we learn to surrender, the more that we learn to go deep inside our inner life, and then also be invited into the inner lives of other people through solidarity. There's a line in the Psalms that says, "Deep calls unto deep." The depth inside me calls and reverberates in sympathetic resonance with the depth inside you. Yeah. So that's the anchored self and the anchored self. And that significant self moves up and down, but we can learn to actually embody the anchored self more and more and live our lives from this place of depth and freedom from egoic needs. So that's the third fundamental of the perennial tradition. Lastly, we have the fourth fundamental of the perennial tradition. And here I have: a person's life on earth has only one end and purpose. That is to awaken into unitive consciousness and then get busy participating in wholeness making in the immediacy of their life's situation, with this body, within this environment, with this sense of vocation. And traditionally, maybe some of us have heard the Sohum, Sanskrit mantra for "I am that," or "you are that." So really the perennial tradition can be encompassed in that one phrase, "You are that." But then one asks, well, what is that? And that is not just the reality of all things, the transcendent layer, the greatest and highest wholeness, but that also is a verb. It's not just a noun or a substance, but it is something that becomes. So that's why I'm saying that in the fourth fundamental of the perennial tradition, it's not enough. Now, this is going against some of what other perennial traditions might say. So I am claiming this as an imperative thing, but I'm not saying I'm right. So hear me saying, based upon my experience of spiritual reading, my graduate work, and people that I really trust on the spiritual, psycho-spiritual path, based on all these things, I'm coming down on the side of, it is not enough to just awaken and achieve, say, unitive consciousness. But once you've done that, once you know that you are God, or you are the ground, that there is no fundamental ontological difference, once you know that at the gnosis level, then you got to get busy doing God. And what does God do? Well, we're going to talk about that. But God wholeness makes the wholeness that I am. I surrender my life into the immediacy of the world around me and steward, create more opportunities for wholeness to complexify. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit of that.
You know, one thing that in the brief time that I've been exposed to a presentation of the wisdom, this is not the kind of stuff that you read or hear once and it's there. In fact, it's more a way of learning that has several stages, which you referred to in general, that you can take the information in intellectually, but it isn't learned until it's embodied. And then and then you can use it and practice it, as you were just kind of finishing up with there. So actually, Samantha has just raised her hand.
Okay.
So hi, Samantha. Good to see you, by the way.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you too, Ken and Marianne. Doug, lovely to listen to you and talk with you. I appreciate this time. I don't know that this is particularly a question. Maybe it's just a comment, but it's referring to the diagram you just had up. And it always strikes me when so often I hear others sort of refer to certain aspects of ourselves as we're not that. I'm not these emotions, or I'm not this voice that's speaking to me in my mind. And it's so interesting to me because I love what you said about the rock and how the rock is sort of one with the ground. There's no distinction between where the rock ends and the ground begins. And it seems like a similar thing could be said about the water, and a similar thing could be said about the floating device in the sky and the clouds. And I sort of think about emotions in that way. And I think about the voices in that way, as though I don't necessarily make a distinction as though that's not me. But I do love what you say about the anchored self being sort of that aspect of self that perhaps presents the purity, or maybe like a sense of the purest aspects of the expression in this incarnate form. And then everything else is just a different, that same expression, but perhaps a different layer of it, or a different aspect. I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying here, but that's just kind of, it's just interesting when I hear people refer to it as, well, that's not me. And I want to release that and get rid of it because it's not really who I am. And I hear that and I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah, beautiful. I love your intuition here. I have done presentations that last a couple hours, even if not a full day, just on the anchored self and floating self and the significant self. But I think I might want to mention one thing that I forgot based on what you just said. The most important way I can understand this, and this is coming from personal experience, but also as a counselor for 22 years, is that the floating self belongs. It's not a matter of getting rid of it. In fact, when we live in the anchored self more and more, what we find is that we actually can use the floating self, the image, whatever you do in the world, the presentation, the clothing of our lives, we use it to actually do good in the world. And the anchored self is no longer about me. I know who I am. I'm just busy doing good. And I'm using whatever means I have. But I don't make any mistakes of saying whatever successes or failures I have are me. On the other hand, the floating self operates from a very, very rigid and narrow and fragile perspective. Its ethos is transcend and exclude. In other words, I'm better than you because I'm more spiritual now, you poor people, or you normies or whatever it is. And then there's an exclusion going on. So, the worst kind of ways to be entrapped in the floating self is to believe that we are in our anchored self in the name of spirituality or higher vibes. It can be an entrapment when we're not even aware of the distinctions that we create, where we're holding somebody else over there and I'm over here. We other people. And so it's a transcending and excluding others. The exact opposite is the case for the anchored self. It is include and transcend. And the last thing I'll say is that I think in English, if we don't change the meaning of the following two words, then we might as well stop using them. because they're not getting us anywhere. And that is the word pure and the word perfect. Because the way that most of us understand the word pure is without blemish, some kind of distilled, perfect crystalline nature without any kind of cracks, say. That's pure. That is not what I'm saying in any way that I understand the anchored self. The anchored self instead is wholeness. Wholeness is a different reality that actually incorporates what we think might be imperfections, but we actually honor them because they're the very thing that helps us when we go through them to include our perfections, our imperfections, and thus transcend them. You see, and so it's not transcending my imperfections like I used to be that way, and now I'm not. Now I'm just going to exclude all that. That's a great way to actually end up entrapping ourselves more. Rather, it is including all of my shadow side, and you know what, including yours too, and then transcending that because there's spaciousness enough inside me to hold it all together. Yeah. Thank you for letting me clarify that and bringing that out in me.
Thanks, Doug.
Okay. Now, I'd like to spend just a minute or two, well, probably more like 3, in distinguishing between 2 lenses through which to look at the perennial tradition. And here's the reason why I want to bring it up. Number one, well, I just want to say again, I could be wrong about all of this. So feel free to disagree. But one of the things that I'm seeing right now is we live in a postmodern world. Postmodernity, if you're not aware, emerged beginning in the 60s and is really strong right now. Postmodernity is not a bad thing. Its job is to critique the excesses of the traditional mindset and the modernity. You know, these 2 worldviews that the world passed in, at least the Western world, passed through for centuries. So the modernity emerged to critique the excesses of traditional, and then postmodernity emerged to critique the modernity and the traditional value system. But the problem with postmodernity, and why I believe we're seeing so many chaotic things going on, is because it is not geared to give people a sense of coherence or meaning or purpose. In fact, one of its tenets is to reject all hierarchies of truth, that all truth is relative, right? And so this causes what I believe to be the greatest ailment, the second greatest ailment that we have in humanity right now, especially in the West, particularly in the United States. And that is the crisis of meaning and its existential angst. It is us walking around saying, who am I? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? And then not being able to believe anybody or what anybody says, especially larger organizations. Everything is held with a suspicion. Okay. What has emerged now are 2 things. One is a desire to move beyond postmodernity into something that gives us a sense of concrete meaning, because we need that. It's not a bad thing. It's important to have a way to understand our reality. Okay. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people are actually emerging and looking at the perennial tradition from the lenses and viewpoint of what's called traditionalism. Now, that's different from traditional heritage values that modernity corrected. Traditionalism has its own set of belief systems and a way to understand the perennial tradition. I'm going to juxtapose that to what I'm calling emerging holism. Now, emerging holism is my own words, but I'm trying to bring in the metaphysics and understanding of different streams of what's called the transcendent universalism lens of the perennial tradition. So I'm actually tweaking the transcendent universalism and bringing it into a new kind of way to understand the perennial tradition, which I'm calling emerging holism. So traditionalism emphasizes a single metaphysical origin of the orthodox religions. All right, and emerging holism emphasizes mystical experience of the eternal now. So let's just take really quickly a look at the traditionalist school of thought to look at the perennial tradition. First, they operate from a narrative of decline. What that means is everything is seen that in the past, we're going to glorify a past time period, and ever since then, humanity has been declining in its purity and declining from the original essence. We have thus distorted and more distorted and more distorted. And the narrative of decline is a worldview that people will then look at the perennial tradition and long for and have a strong nostalgia for a past time period. And it's usually a time period, honestly, that never actually existed. So it's creating a false, or at least a very difficult, hard time period to pin down, and then evoking a strong nostalgia for that. Okay. The traditionalist school also is interested in recovering the religion, the original religion, the original way to understand metaphysics. Emphasis here is on the spiritual isness of a people. So you might say this particular group of people that have lived here are of this type of spiritual DNA. And that over there is of this type, and they're different. And we have to make sure that people stay in their lanes. Even as we honor the differences, we are going to declare that it's a multipolar kind of world where things are defined by the isness of a group spirituality. There's an emphasis of the freedom of a people, but not the freedom of individuals that make up a people. So there's an idea that the different isness of a culture and the people that make up the culture itself has the freedom to self-express, and it's usually in terms of war, express itself in terms of trying to better themselves against someone else. But the individuals inside that group are not expected to have freedom. There's an emphasis in the cycles of time. So a lot of people in the traditionalist school of thought might see that we're in the Kali Yuga at the moment. You know, this period of destruction, and it is imperative, therefore, to accelerate. You know, to create even more chaos. Some people would advocate. I'm not saying everybody in the traditionalist school does this, but to advocate even stronger chaos, because it's only through the phoenix burning up does the new phoenix arise. You see. And it's this cycle of time that keeps repeating. There's an emphasis in purity, and it's understood as plurality is uniformity. What I mean by that is we can have lots of people, but they are going to be just alike in this group. And you guys can do your thing over there. And so they're going to be emphasizing uniformity of singleness of belief system and of a leader. There's an inherent inequality of different people. So not only within the different cultures, but you do have different, that, you know, they would see that other groups may not possess the same divine gifts that we possess, spiritual gifts. And within each group, you have a very strong emphasis on hierarchies. So sometimes this can emerge as fascism, a kind of fascist way to understand the perennial tradition. And it's understood that there is a bottom serves the top. And the top it's a very top-down model and that the bottom does not is not allowed to have access to the fullness that the top would have. Now, service, therefore, serving other people is expected, but it's actually expected to be used to maintain and enforce the structure of each group. And structure is honored and lauded because it provides meaning and purpose and direction and promise of glory, promise of the promised land. Structure is freeing because it keeps us from not having to, it keeps us to know exactly what to say in this particular way, in this particular time, with this particular role that I have in this spiritual hierarchy. And to be honest, it does assuage the existential anxiety. There's a contentment and even a joy that can come from that. Overall, the traditionalist school of the perennial philosophy would understand that God, or the creator, or the ground of being, is a sovereign entity, and there is a distinct ontological difference between creator and creation. Okay, the two are very different, and never will they come together.
We can identify how that first perspective, the traditionalist, is showing up currently in the world and in our country. I mean, it tends to be more of the right end of the political spectrum, and it's the folks that are kind of very focused on it's our way is the best way and no one else's is really tolerated. Is that
yes, and it's also looking at people below us in the spiritual social hierarchy and saying, it's a refusal to help them, or a refusal to acknowledge their needs because they belong there. It's kind of like that. Okay, so emergent holistic school of perennial philosophy, instead of the narrative of decline, I call it the narrative of becoming. Wholeness is breaking into the present moment. It's now. It's not a past, but actually the wholeness itself, which is ever present in pure possibility and potentiality, is coming in, being invited in to break into this moment. It emphasizes awakening to the depth of now through the isness of now, for the purpose of a future coming together. So let me just say this. It's emphasizing that now there's this surface level. It's like what we think is going on, the isness of now, and there's the depth of now. That's that wholeness wanting to break in. And it's all looking forward to a future, which might be the next second or 100 years or 1,000 years, of following the pattern that all things come together and create a new complexity. So it's a future coming together. The emergent holistic school emphasizes history as a slow march of the evolution of consciousness. So it's not necessarily cycles of time, but rather an expanding spiral of increasing complexity. The kindergartner is not expected, say, to do calculus. One goes through time and marches and expands one's consciousness. It emphasizes the congruence between metaphysical, physical, and psychological. That what is true at the spiritual, higher, quote, more expanded levels of consciousness, it's got to be here found in the concreteness of this moment, the immanence here. And it's going to be true for the human, the emotional or psychological worlds and realms. It emphasizes the quality of every person, not necessarily the quality of every role. Go ahead.
Just on the previous point, would you say that the phrase that we hear fairly often, as above, so below, is that another way of describing?
As within, so without.
Yeah. Okay. So
yes.
Similar kind of thing. Okay.
That is true. Yeah. And and it's true metaphysically above and below. It's true physically above and below. You get it. Yeah. Okay. It emphasizes that every individual person has an inherent freedom to choose their manner of serving. It emphasizes praxis over ideas, service over beliefs. And this is an important critique here, because a lot of the ancient presentations that I have read and tried to immerse myself into often hold gnosis, that word gnosis, or the Gnostics, as evolving through special and esoteric knowledge. It's to know more, know the capital T truth. And it's almost a preference of truth as the primacy of truth. And what I'm saying here is, sure, we can do the primacy of truth if truth is defined as love, if truth is defined as loving service or embodiment of these esoteric teachings for the betterment of all of us, the collective, then we are talking about this emergent holistic school. Then we are talking about taking and reading whatever we are, bringing that, incarnating it here and now. It emphasizes plurality as unity. Before, it was plurality as uniformity. So plurality as unity is interesting, because I'm defining, and I'm borrowing this from my friend and mentor, Richard Rohr. I'm not sure if some of you might know of him or may not. Unity is defined as diversity, which is honored and maintained by love. That my journey doesn't have to be your journey. My way of understanding things doesn't have to be your way. My way of service doesn't have to be your way. And in fact, my individual diverse expression of myself is honored and sacred, and so is yours. Now, emphasizes holarchies. Instead of hierarchies, we're talking about holoarchies of service. So you can imagine, instead of a structure where there's a high up and then a flow chart down, imagine a pebble being dropped into a still water. And so you have an epicenter, and then you have waves of consciousness evolving out, and they all belong together in one kind of organism made up of multiple parts, members of one body, if you will. And so emphasis is on serving the poor. And the poor is defined externally, say, with people who are at the lower levels of socioeconomic stratus, serving them, asking what are their questions in life. And the poor inside you and me. Because I tell you what, you and I, well, maybe you're perfect, I don't know, but I'll speak about myself. The areas in me where, even though I've been a counselor for 22 years, I still find myself reacting when I was 5 with certain kinds of insecurities, the impoverishment that I would feel of not being free from certain kinds of ways to understand myself in the world. That's a kind of poverty that is not dealt with by stuffing it down or ignoring it, just like I wouldn't stuff down and put the poor over there, but rather it's about accepting it, looking at it, honoring it, and maybe using it to help me, with my conscious mind, expand more. In other words, the areas of my own anxiety or insecurity actually become the teachers that I use to grow in greater metanoia, or love, heart, mind. Yeah. Honors the dynamic tension between structure and freedom. We need structure, because otherwise the water needs the cup. Otherwise it just goes everywhere. But the water is not. The cup is not the water. The cup might be the container, that's the structure, but we need the contents too. So that's freedom. We need both. How do we get through this? The point is that the emergent holistic school of perennial philosophy will honor, some of you may have heard the law of three, honors that within the seemingly impossibility of getting through something, there's always a hidden third force. There's a hidden thing that wants to be born. And actually, we have to learn to develop the skill to midwife that hidden reconciling force that brings the whole thing to a new gestalt, a new higher order of being. You see, and that's how things evolve. So conflict is actually the stepping stone and the tool to evolve into a greater wholeness. And lastly, and this last piece could actually be a whole another talk, but I'll say this: God in the emergent holistic school, and this is Law of One, this is all of the schools of the perennial philosophy, which I personally trust. Doesn't mean I'm right. God is a relational process, the relational process, whereby the one desires to become the many are drawn to become one, and the whole order, or the order of wholeness, complexifies by one gestalt. So what does that mean? Very simply, you're going to have, let's say you have the Big Bang, okay? Eventually you've got these little two hydrogen ones going out there. So the one desires to experience itself through manyness, boom. Then you've got, let's say, two little hydrogen atoms, and you've got a oxygen atom, and they're individuated, but they cannot deny the incredible instinct. They're drawn to unity, because that's the very nature of God, to complexify. So they're drawn to become and unify, that diversity being maintained by love. And when they come together, they become one. Well, now what do we have? We have manyness that is one, and now there's a new singularity that is also one. It's a water molecule, and we talk about water molecule as a single entity made up of three. So that is the order of wholeness complexifies by one gestalt. Okay, there you go. So this is what I think God looks like. This is what I think you look like. This is what I think I look like. If the whole perennial philosophy had a shape and a motion, there it is. It's a torus field. It's a torus field that is flowing and expanding and contracting and ever learning and processing.
First of all, thanks, Doug, because I think that was an excellent overview of a subject that lifetimes can be spent studying and getting to know more and more. And so the hope for this particular episode of this program was to just provide some introduction for those who may not be familiar with this at all, or to stimulate further conversation and desire to learn more and do the things you just described, to draw together and create new together and bring whole new gestalts. To me, one of the things that also makes studying this rewarding is having the experiences of seeing the same things in the different forms of the wisdom. So I have been exposed to one presentation for a little over 2 years, and so many of the things that you just presented, I could draw the parallels and come to the language that's used in that presentation, but it is the same principle. So for instance, when you were talking about the matter of conflict actually being a force that can generate something new, and that it's not something to reject or dismiss, but actually recognize that that is a way of creating something new. The presentation I'm studying talks about that we can bring about harmony through conflict, and that there is a particular energy that can be invoked, frankly, to help bring that about. And it's not pleasant. It doesn't mean that you don't have to go through the conflict to get to the harmony. So none of this is, I think part of what we see today too is in our kind of instant gratification society, there's all sorts of things now where there's kind of a add water and stir to get to enlightenment, and I think that isn't necessarily the way it's going to happen for most. I think some people may have a kind of a flash and suddenly they're there, but for most, it's a very gradual kind of process. But these same things are what we eventually all come to have gnosis of, frankly. And it's another way of putting it is the many paths up the mountain leading to the same summit. And so that's some first thoughts that I have, but I would love it if anybody else has questions. And actually, Chris has just entered something in the chat, so let me read that. There seems to be a masculine impulse to some of your ideas. I assume he's talking to you, Doug. As a male, my feminine side is not comfortable with your idea of reconciliation. Must I reconcile with you or simply choose not to and move on to a different independent place in my present?
I may not have explained it very well, because the law of three is not necessarily masculine and feminine in the way that I'm understanding the comment. The law of three, or reconciling, is always going to be the process whereby the masculine and feminine form a new collective or a new kind of work, a synthesis that honors the masculine and the feminine together without getting rid of them. And you have a new kind of balance between them. So, for example, one might say that we, in our Western world, we've had an overwrought, overexcited masculine energy gone amok. Some would say that. I would agree. And it's not been a great expression of masculinity. Now, is the answer to to have the feminine energy rise and then, let's say, defeat the masculine energy, because we have so many imbalances right now caused by masculine energy? Well, if the feminine energy or the divine feminine are people who see themselves as warriors or stewards of feminine energy, were to do that, then we still have the same paradigm. It's just now it's shifted. Instead, what we're finding is the greatest way is to find this conundrum that we have right now and learn a new way to incorporate divine masculinity with divine femininity. And we do that on the inner life, the inner world. That's what Jung talked about. And we do that so that we are then able to embody the principles of good forward thinking, good movement thinking, as well as embody the principles of nurturing and collecting and honoring that which is. So that's the masculine and the feminine together.
There's a few other things that, as you know, I'll keep an eye on if other people do run into questions, but kind of back to the idea of trying to just provide the first class of the semester orientation to what it is that we're kind of talking about. And you may have, you certainly touched on this a little bit, but there's overlap between the wisdom and the major religions in the world, even the minor religions in the world. But can you speak to that a little bit as to kind of how this may be similar and different from what we think of as the religious institutions?
Okay, again, it's my opinion, which is not scholarly and it's not expert. So please take it with a grain of salt. The way I understand religions is, I think it's our particular human attempt to understand ways to have unitive consciousness. In other words, if we're all one, and that is the truth, I am that, or you are that. If that is the total truth, capital T truth, it is not enough just to say that. We have to learn how to have that as a gnosis, and this takes many lifetimes, and in a lifetime it takes a lot of work too, to have that as an actual gnosis, and then to embody that and to create opportunities for others to have that too. Now, religions then are attempts at creating structures. Usually they're historical and cultural in nature. They're attempts to create and codify structures that would help people do just that, to realize the relational nature between that which we worship, say, or that which we hold as transcendent, and ourselves. Another way to look at it, I think, is religion can be the fingers pointing at the moon. So we have different religions are pointing at the moon, and that spirituality is the experience of the moon itself. Okay, so religions are pointing at the moon, and spirituality is the experience of the moon itself. And one of the big problems about religions, and the word religion really just means reattach, religare in Latin. Ligare, ligament, attach, and re means again. So religions are trying to create structures that help us transcend the suffering of our life, to find meaning there, and then to be able to use that to connect and go enjoy the moon. But they are not to be mistaken for the moon itself. And many people who are in the individual religions would say, my religion is the moon, and too bad for you. So we have churchianity instead of Christianity, for example. But spirituality is actually the enjoyment of the moon itself.
Okay, that's as good an explanation as I think I could have hoped for, and try to differentiate it. And it's not all easily compartmentalized, which I think is the point, is that it all does eventually fold back into one source, and it's this infinite expression that everything is, and that we are. And it's part of understanding this truth as the wisdom is to understand that we are these actually various parts, like when you were talking with Samantha about that one model, is that we are actually all of these things at the same time. And there is not a qualitative hierarchy to those. So your human self is not in any way lesser or lower than your spiritual self, say, but it's all necessary, and it's also actually just all part of the oneness infinitely expressing itself to come to know itself in every possible way, infinitely. Yeah. And that, I think, is something that you would also see as a constant in each presentation of the wisdom. Is that a fair statement?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Just that concept that everything is an expression of this one source, basically.
Everything, I mean, the way I like to think of it, and I don't know if this is the best way, but let's say white light, pure unadulterated white light, would like to experience itself because it's awakened to the fact that it exists. Okay. But white light cannot experience itself. There is no differentiation, no hue, no no subtlety, no nuance. It's pure, unadulterated uniformity, if you will. And there's no experience in that. So white light, or the pure infinity, has to actually come up with a very novel idea. I mean, against the backdrop of infinity, it's incredible that it's incredible the imagination of the mind of reality could conceive of this one idea, and that is finity or finitude, limitedness. I mean, that's incredible leap of consciousness. Now, we can imagine this one idea of finitude as being a prism. We have white light, prism, finitude, and the white light then self-donates, or in the Christian, it's often called kenosis, self-emptying or pouring of the self into this one idea, finitude. Now, what emerges from this prism are 7 different expressions of the one white light. The ontology, the beingness, is divine. And there's no difference between the red, the yellow, any of these colors in the white light. The ontology is the same, but the expression is different. Now you have the capacity to relate, to distinguish, and to enjoy infinite variety. And here's the cool thing, is that the one white light not only experiences itself through all the different myriad of colors and the combinations therein, but each one of these combinations and colors are also sentient wholenesses, individuated from the white light, and yet still contained in the nature of light, still one unified relational pattern, which we call God. But we have a subtle difference. Now we have source, and we have creator and created, but they're not different ontologically, and they actually inform each other for a greater, constant, greater complexification. Everything moves to greater wholeness. Yeah, that was a very heady response. Sorry about that. But it is something to try to think about.
It's awesome, and I think it was a great kind of intro analogy to use to really paint a very clear picture. I think I hope our audiences share this, that to kind of get to see how a oneness can be expressed in different ways, and at the same time retain the fact that it is of that oneness, but in those expressions has now also created different forms, basically. Yeah. Chris added a clarification, and he's not in a place that he's able to come on camera, so I'll read his clarification. It gets back to this point, I believe, about conflict, and he said, are we required to reconcile, or can we choose not to?
Well, to not reconcile is a type of reconciliation, is it not? In other words, if I'm walking away from a problem that is not worth it, it's not life-giving for me, it's not life-giving for you, then I am choosing to do something, which is to I mean, if it's in a healthy way, it's to set boundaries by not participating in some level of toxicity. But that is a reconciliation that creates, if it's done healthily in me, and it's not some sort of passive aggressive, F you, but if it's done in an appropriate, healthy way, then I actually experience a type of gestalt, don't I? Because maybe I was codependent. Maybe I didn't know even how to separate myself from somebody. And I got to a point where I learned the value of my own dignity and free will and freedom to be dignified. So therefore, I'm going to not resolve this conflict, because it's actually would entrap me and keep me entrapped in the same level of consciousness. My own sense of growth is reached a point where I'm honoring and risking to live without that person, so that I move in a different direction, and I'm thus whole, more whole, especially if I can see the other person not with the lens of you suck, I'm gonna scapegoat you, but rather I love you, but I can't. I love myself, and I can't allow myself to be constrained energetically anymore. So I love you. I wish you well-being. I'm going to go do my thing, and that is a gestalt.
Right. And Chris also gave us a thumbs up. So he appreciates the answer and thank you for taking the question. And as you were providing that answer, Doug, I also thought that you included in that bullet point when you were reviewing that part of the model reference to you call it the law of three. And another thing that I think the wisdom can teach her that there are certain laws of the universe, if you will, and they are such because they don't have exception. And so in what you just described, the process still played out. It may not play out in the way our minds are conditioned to normally think, that the resolution means a compromise or kumbaya or something. The resolution could be walking away, but something new emerged out of that conflict. And also in keeping with the presentation I'm studying, that did produce a harmony, where before there was a conflict and a tension, agreeing to disagree and walk away and growing from that and creating something new. Again, unless there's a different response, but that wouldn't violate that law, because that would just mean the conflict has changed in nature.
Yes. Now it's important, if I do walk away from a relationship, if I look at that person from whom I walked away with some kind of energetics that holds them less than me,
Mm-hmm.
even if their behavior is atrocious, okay, then I have not transformed. I'm not into a new gestalt. I'm actually vibrating at the same level. Here's a perennial term for you. If we can go to the Christian lens of this, or even the Judean Jew lens of this, and that is made in the image and likeness of the Creator. So one way to understand this is that we are all made in the image of this one infinite reality that we've been talking about, this one relational process. You and I are individuated, sentient, quantized packets of energy that look like Doug and look like Ken, and that we're in a process trying to learn how to enjoy gnosis of unity and then steward the wholeness out. Like, that's what our whole thing is.
Yeah.
Now, that's the image of God. We're made in that image. But my likeness might be really different than the wholeness. I might actually be pretty evil. I might have chosen the negative path. I might go around trying to further the ethos of separation. Maybe I want to manipulate people. Okay, not really me, Doug, but I'm just saying, hypothetically, if someone is choosing to exercise their free will in the enslavement at the very worst, or neutral, keeping things neutral and not moving forward in terms of transformation, well, that's not really the likeness of God, and there's going to be lifetimes to kind of get there. So I want to honor the image of God that someone who has done me wrong, and I'm actually distancing myself from, say, I'm going to honor their image, but I can disapprove their likeness, and I can move myself away from that. Does that help? Is that maybe that is a good clarity there?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what is really meant when people say namaste, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's I see the real you, or I see the God within you, something along those lines.
I honor the image of God in you.
And it's not to say that I'm going to love every different persona or personality that I come across, but you see that distinction and recognize that it's that expression that you may not like, but you recognize that that's still an expression.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gary has a question. So Gary, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And thank you, Doug, for a very interesting presentation. As you were talking, I had a number of thoughts going through my mind. It's hard to sort of bring them all together into a coherent question, but I'll do what I can. By way of introducing myself, like you, I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and I guess part of what I'd like to find out from you is maybe just a thumbnail sketch of your own. I don't know if struggle is too strong a word, but just your evolution and how maybe in a practical way you've come to terms with what you have learned through your study. I should also mention that I'm in the Boston area, so I'm aware that Boston College is run by the Jesuits, and I don't know at what point of your evolution you were a student there, but I'm kind of interested in whether you had any difficulties as you went along and were realizing some things from your own experience. I also want to say that I had the pleasure of attending an event in San Francisco in my youth with Alan Watts, who you're probably familiar with. He comes from the Anglican tradition, but in his own evolution, discovered some of what I think you're talking about. Tragically, he had some personal problems which overcame him in the end, but he became recognized as a spiritual teacher. And one comment that he made that has never left me is he talked about traditional Christianity and said that he referred to Gregorian chant as a means of raising consciousness or expressing perhaps a expanded awareness, and it provided for him a wonderful environment within which to engage in his own and our own perhaps way of coming to new understandings based on experience. And of course, there have been those people within the Christian tradition, like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, who themselves had a mystical orientation, but I think they probably kept a fairly low profile rather than maybe wanting to express what they had discovered in a way that would be of benefit, not only to their fellow monks and nuns, but rather to the wider world. So to come to a question here, we've been talking about a number of things that as separate subjects, but I think perhaps you could help us synthesize some of these things. So you were just talking about, or based on some of Ken's questions, this way of reconciling tension when you find it in your experience. But I think that tension, and this sort of goes to Chris's question, we find it on a societal level as well. And in my own experience, or what it seems like to me, is that the Judeo-Christian tradition in particular sort of has this retrograde role that it's sort of holding us back in a way. And I think there are historical reasons for that. I mean, when the Roman Empire took a hold of the teachings of Jesus, they put their own understandings sort of layered on top of that. And, Catholicism has sort of gone further with that. But so my question is, at the societal level or the larger level, yes, the Catholic Church has gone through its own revolution with Vatican II, but I don't see it as moving in the kind of direction that you've been talking about. And so one more thing, and then I'll shut up. Do you see any sort of not necessarily providential kind of energy, but is it just randomness and we struggle and have our warfares and misunderstandings with one another, or is there what some people call divine plan? Is what we're going through a manifestation of something that's going to end up being good for us, or could things go in any direction, and it's as random and chaotic as it's sometimes seen? It's a very rambly sort of question, I suppose, but I'd like to see what you can do with it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for such a very deep reflection and questions. Rather than spend way too much time trying to unpack all those good things, let me see if I can offer just a brief reflection. Now, these are all based on my own opinions, and I'm not saying I got it right, but this is how I've made sense of it. I was fired at the University of Dallas. I was the director of counseling department, and I had a student who I had given one or two of my articles online, which are very esoteric, and she liked him at first, but when she started failing, she needed a scapegoat. So she turned me into the boss, and then the next day I was hauled in front of 4 of the leading people there, including the priest and whatnot, and was basically accused of certainly being a heretic, but more of a cult leader of the law of one, and that I was using counseling and whatnot. I mean, it was biblical, man. And I tell you what, was it painful? Yeah. Was it did I feel shame? Yeah. But the way I conceptualized it, and still do, is I knew that this was an initiation for me to hold them, and I was modeling myself from Christ in front of Pontius Pilate. Who are you? And these things have been thrown against you. What do you say for yourself? And I couldn't defend myself because he had all the power. And moreover, if I tried to explain myself, there would be no way in which I knew he could see validity in how I understood the Catholic faith. And so, I was fired, and if I were him, I would fire me too, to be honest. Now, because I could see why he'd be so scared. But how I understand it is I don't see a difference. Because I think Catholicism is actually meaning universal. I understand the way my faith is to see that the best parts of the Catholic Church, and I would argue for the Christian lens, is exactly what I tried to say today. And that is, there is a transcendent reality. That transcendent reality incarnates, period. And that transcendent reality dwells within every little manifestation, incarnated manifestation. So the way I understand the Trinity, for example, is God is that which transcends, that which incarnates, and that which dwells within. There's the triune mystery that is the law of one, and it's the perennial philosophy. And within Catholicism, say, there is a particular emphasis on what's called the Eucharist. The Eucharist, understood sacramentally, is nothing less and nothing more, in my opinion, than a bodily participation of the mystery of how things must die in order to rise. In other words, to partake in the Eucharist, which means thanksgiving, by the way, in Greek, Eucharist, to partake in the Eucharist for me is to physically embody digest, take within my personal body the mystery, capital M, of the entire rhythm of how God becomes. Because from the universe to a star to a bug to you and me to every other level below, there's always a dying, a living, a dying, and a rising. That is it. There's nothing else outside of that. And so when I partake in Eucharist, I am partaking in that exact mystery. Okay. And the only thing you can say to such grand notions to actually be invited in that is to say thank you. And that's what Eucharist means. Again, gratefulness. So the way I would wrap that up is to say, when you and your life have gone through a difficult time, I'm just making this up, but let's say you've gone through a very hard time. And then after a period of time, you emerge on the other side of that. If you're like me and you're like other people, you can say, my God, I never would have chosen to go through that. That sucked, man. Don't ever sign me up for that shit again. But I can stand here on this side of the cross, okay, so this side of the crucifixion of my own life, and say, but I am so dang grateful that I went through it, because I would not be who I am with my ability to love you and love myself and love this seemingly broken reality. I couldn't do it unless I had gone through my own death and crucifixion. And that is the resurrection. And that, the only thing you can say is thank you. That's what Eucharist means, and that is Holy Communion. So that is how I can stay Catholic. I am Catholic, even though very few Catholics would look at what I believe, New Agey, alien, perennial philosophy stuff, and they would see me as a heretic. But that's okay, because I'm okay for them having a view like this, even if my view is a little bit bigger. I'm okay with that. I can include them and transcend, but I don't have to transcend them and exclude. So that's sort of how I understand that. And that's wrapping up a lot of what you've said and bringing it to some kind of way that maybe try to answer that.
If I could, I'd just like to follow up, maybe sort of directing your attention back to my actual question, which has to do with the societal manifestation of the tensions that exist, and whether you see how you see.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Things unfolding.
I tried to answer that implicitly, but let me be explicit. Okay. Now this is my belief system, and it's in the law of one. So I'm actually declaring that what I'm about to say is a belief system that is it's founded inside esoteric material, which I trust. I don't need to say it's the full truth, but I can trust it. And what is presented there is that humanity itself exists within a certain bandwidth of consciousness that is called third density, or the third chakra of God. All right. You and I have 7 chakras. That's a perennial philosophy, these 7 energy centers of ways to understand our reality. And that in the macro level, the being that transcends us has 7 chakras too. Of course, it would have to be that way. And we are in the third chakra of God. And we are actually, as a humanity, a collective moving into the 4th chakra. But here's the problem. The only way that the earth becomes 4th density, or 4th density, and humanity itself transform and become the butterfly of 4th density. We're the caterpillar now to become the butterfly. The only way that happens is if we can deal with our collective bellicosity. That means this energetic is warlike energetic that we operate on from the individual to the collective. And what is going to happen is, in the 4th density experience, humanity will not use words unless necessary. There will be a natural, easy way to just use mental telepathy. We'll be able to read each other's energies so that I will, through empathy and intuition, experience you and you will experience me. There'll be total transparency between us in the world. And the actual task of the fourth density bandwidth of consciousness is to merge into what's called a unified collective organism, or what Ra calls the social memory complex. So it's a unified heart mind collective of one thing. You know, in other words, the many become one and are increased by this new gestalt. That one thing is called an ecclesia. What is an ecclesia? It's Greek for church. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the third density seed form thought structure of what church is actually going to come to its full consummation and plenum in the fourth density experience. But in order for us to get there, in order for us to get to that place, we have to go through a lot more of the chaos. Because what this chaos is a, let's say, a divine law, which is called the law of responsibility. It's connected with karma. And we are being forced, literally forced, to look in the mirror and to say, I will not project anymore. I will not hold and other people and hold them in contempt. I will not, because every time I do that, I'm actually hurting myself. And when that can become our lived experience, and we forgive, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. We break into living in the heart chakra. And that is congruent with the fourth density, the fourth chakra of God. That is where we're moving to. So all of what's going on right now is on the macro scale, in my humble opinion, equivalent to the individual person coming to my office, counseling office, saying, I am so angry, I can't stand it anymore, and I'm constantly anxious, and my wife sucks, and all these problems. And then we do some exploration and we find out, based on, I'm just going to make this up, based on him, the man, maybe he's had some really hard experiences growing up, wasn't modeled very well, and he's projected his pain and hurt onto other people all his life. So what he holds as other people and demonizing other people is really his inability to recognize and process his own pain. And when he can do that, he can then maybe set boundaries, but not demonize other people. That, on an individual level, is what we have to do on the macro level. And the only way we're going to do that is to have the pus of this infection of bellicosity come to the surface so that it can be acknowledged and cleaned. And then when we're vibrating at a certain congruency for the lessons necessary in fourth density, then we will move as a collective, one body, into the fourth density of God.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you.
So I would just add to that very briefly that I think the answer to Gary's question in short is yes, this is all part of a divine plan, if you want to use that expression, that this isn't just random, and it isn't just all going to hell in a handbasket with nothing to come after it. It's part of continuing to evolve and to grow, to be able to shift perspectives and see it that way. And Doug, you've made a couple of references to the fundamental everything kind of being from love, but learning that contrast to fear is also part of what this is about. And that's what we are experiencing individually and collectively a lot, is that too. We're way past the hour, and I asked Doug a couple of weeks ago if he was had time limits tonight. He hasn't. And I think what anybody that has been stayed with us so far or may see this on YouTube in the future should be able to tell right now is that these are not brief discussions. And this is something that reminds me of something I heard Tammy Simon of Sounds True say, that when we're exploring these things and when we're on our own spiritual paths, there is no there. There's not some final destination that we're going to reach. And we could discuss any of these questions infinitely, frankly, because they will continue to unfold. But there are some basic things that when one studies whatever forms of the wisdom they choose to, you will begin to get some answers and then continue to grow from there. And new questions will arise as your understanding shifts, and it kind of takes that shape. In my experience, there have been times when that process can be as wonderful and engaging as anything I've ever done, and other times where it's totally overwhelming. And it just is it's a part of that growth process too. If you can just kind of give your thoughts to kind of finish this off, because one thing that I believe, and I'm certainly not alone in this, is one thing that has beginning to mark more and more this time is the introduction of and greater availability of the quantum sciences and how those integrate with this. And I don't know if you're familiar enough with that to comment, but it's something that I'm finding increasingly fascinating, in how we are at a time when some things that used to just we'd have to rely on as other words, now we've got other things to kind of help label and frame through the quantum sciences. Just wonder if you have thoughts on that.
I think that we do best when science and spirituality and psychology and all of this emerge again into a new complexity, and then actually affirm and describe the perennial tradition, as I'm calling it, emergent holism, describe it from their own perspective, and that we respect the diversity in this complexity, but they're all pronouncing with one voice a univocity of wholeness. And that's why it's wonderful to live right now.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your attention and your energy, because I couldn't say these things without the energy that I'm receiving from you, because there's no distance between us. And I'd like to say that we're opening up we're calling it the Building Forth Center. In fact, if you can go online, we just started it today. One of our members has worked on it for about a month, and it's called buildingforthcenter.com. And it's a community that we started, and it's a center, and we're gearing towards very similar to what you guys are doing. But our particular mission is to provide the bridge between the conventional and the cosmic. We need bridge builders that can not throw any babies out with bathwaters. We're not in that business. We're in the business of honoring the babies, clean the bathwater, and then walking with. And so you're welcome to check out that Building Forth, FOURTH, which is fourth density and the fourth chakra. So I know we get a little clever there. And we have a community meeting every Tuesday night. So if you're interested, you can reach me. I'm at doug@cosmicchrist.net. I'm sure you can put that in there. So there's two sites then. There's the cosmicchrist.net is my personal blog. And then there's the Building Forth Center, which we're going to continue to expand as services come about. Yeah. So
fantastic. Anything else, Doug, obviously, again, this is barely scratching the surface. I can't think of how this could have gone any better, though, and just hoping to be able to open the door maybe for more people. I just feel, and several others that are in the IFGT group with me, that, you know, it is part of evolution is to bring new information that works its way into the zeitgeist, right? And so you can't do that without first bringing it and then having bridge builders like you're describing, to bring it into what becomes kind of the conventional wisdom or just everyday knowledge. But there's a point at which it has to go through that process. And a lot of this information has had a long history of being kept under wraps because it hasn't always been well received. So there's a bit of optimism and a bit of courage, perhaps, to take it forward and trust that now is a time to bring this to more people. That I think,
well, wholeness always wins.
Yeah,
love always wins. Wholeness always wins. And whatever was kept in wraps from a wholeness perspective was all part of this larger wholeness breaking in, that things can converge when humanity needs it at exactly the right time. So I don't demonize those who did the hiding, say, because it's all being received and emerging right now in ways that never could be imagined before. You know, so we're excited to be stewards of this wholeness.
Yeah, well, perfect. That was beautifully said. Again, thanks so much, Doug. I really appreciate it. It's just been a joy to meet you, to continue the association with the family and with IFGT. I think it'd be great to explore and see if there are things that we can continue to do as the Building Forth group gets underway further, and look forward to exploring it all. So if there's nothing else that you wanted to say, then
well, thank you. I just
yeah.
again, thank you so much. And I see the wholeness of the infinite creator in you, and it's in me. And all I can say is the joy of being together in unified spirit is truly my greatest joy right now. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. So thanks very much. Thanks everyone for coming and staying. Really enjoyed it. And for those who see this later on YouTube, thank you for watching that. And just now take the opportunity to begin exploring more if it calls to you, and learn more, because it's infinite, but it's a joy, and it's an amazing process. So Doug, thanks again for being our ambassador and bridge builder.
My pleasure. My honor. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Have a good night.